April 18, 1943, 21,000 feet above the Solomon Islands. The sky was a blinding sea of white fire, sunlight reflecting off the endless Pacific below. Two squadrons cut through it. A pack of silver-blue Grumman F6F Hellcats, their radial engines growling deep and steady, heading east. Ahead, like flickering shadows, came the enemy. The Imperial Japanese Navy's prized A6M0 fighters, light, nimble, and deadly in the right hands. Lieutenant Bill Tex McDonnell squinted through his canopy. His squadron had been briefed that the new Hellcat was tougher than anything before, but many still weren't sure. The F6F was heavier, slower on the climb, and looked, in the words of one skeptical pilot, like a barrel with wings. The Japanese, too, thought it a joke. Over radio chatter, a voice cracked through the static. Zeros, 11 o'clock high. Coming fast. The sky exploded with motion. The Zeros dove, sunlight flashing on their wings, guns blazing in tight spirals. They danced, as they always had, graceful, precise, the very image of Japan's early war dominance. But this time, something different happened. The Hellcats didn't scatter. They absorbed the blows. McDonnell's canopy rattled with bullet impacts, small-caliber rounds bouncing harmlessly off the reinforced fuselage. He rolled hard left, lined up his 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, and squeezed the trigger. The air filled with the roar of fire and smoke. A Zero burst into flame, spiraling into the sea below. On the Japanese side, disbelief spread over the radios. Their bullets couldn't break the Hellcat's armor. Their tight turns no longer guaranteed survival. The massive American fighters just kept coming. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky was littered with black smoke trails. 15 Zeros down. One Hellcat lost. The message was clear and terrifying. Japan's long reign of air superiority had met its reckoning. Far below, as the burning aircraft sank into the Pacific, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's words still echoed across Japan's war machine. I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant. And now, that giant had wings. Bethpage, Long Island, 1942. Inside the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, the smell of oil, steel, and ambition hung thick in the air. Engineers worked under buzzing lights, hunched over blueprints stained with coffee and graphite dust. Outside, the world was burning, and America needed a fighter that could turn the tide. The Wildcat, Grumman's earlier design, had fought bravely but was now outclassed by Japan's Zero. American pilots had learned that lesson in blood, over Wake Island, the Coral Sea, and Midway. They'd radio back the same message again and again: we can't climb with them. We can't turn with them. At the center of this storm stood Leroy Grumman, a soft-spoken engineer with the face of a machinist and the mind of a visionary. He didn't want a beautiful plane. He wanted one that could survive. On a chalkboard scrawled with rough equations, Grumman drew the outline of what would become the F6F Hellcat, a monster powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. It would be heavier, yes, but faster in a dive. It would not dance with the Zero, it would crush it. His team began building a prototype in secret. When test pilot Robert Hall first climbed into the cockpit, the plane still smelled of paint and hot rivets. He pushed the throttle forward, and the Hellcat leapt from the runway with a roar that silenced the hangar. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't light. But it felt unstoppable. In just over a year, Grumman's factory went from blueprints to full production. Hundreds of Hellcats rolled off the line each month, assembled by thousands of young men and women working day and night. Some were barely 20 years old, their hands black with oil, their clothes soaked in sweat. They didn't know it yet, but every bolt they tightened was changing the outcome of the Pacific War. The Navy didn't waste a moment. The first squadrons were shipped to carriers, Essex, Yorktown, and Lexington, with a single order: tested in battle. And soon, the skies over the Pacific would become a proving ground for the machine Japan had mocked. October 1943. South Pacific. The air above the Caroline Islands shimmered with heat. On the flight deck of the USS Essex, a row of freshly painted F6F Hellcats waited, wings folded like predators at rest. Deck crews in grease-stained uniforms darted between them, signaling, fueling, checking every inch of steel. Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare, one of the Navy's top aces, stood by his aircraft, helmet in hand. He'd seen what the Zeros could do. He'd seen them tear apart older Wildcats with impossible agility. But today he was flying something new. Something built not for elegance, but for endurance. The mission: intercept incoming Japanese bombers before they reached the fleet. Radar had just picked up their approach, dozens of dots closing in fast. Engines thundered to life, shaking the deck as propellers blurred into white discs. "Launch the Hellcats," came the order, and one by one, the fighters were hurled into the air by catapult, roaring into the sky like steel arrows. Minutes later, they met the enemy. The Japanese formation appeared through the clouds, sleek A6M-Zeros escorting bombers toward the American task force. The Zeros immediately peeled off to engage. They dove gracefully, turning with the fluid precision that had dominated the Pacific for years. But this time, the Americans didn't turn with them. O'Hare's voice cut through the radio. "Don't dogfight them. Climb, roll, and dive. Hit hard, then pull away." The Hellcats struck from above, their 6.50 caliber guns unleashing firestorms. The Zeros twisted, but their thin armor couldn't withstand the onslaught. One after another, they disintegrated midair, wings tearing off in sheets of flame. O'Hare banked sharply, smoke trailing his wingtips, and saw a Zero trying to climb onto his tail. He slammed the throttle and pulled into a steep dive, something no Zero could follow without tearing itself apart. The Japanese pilot tried, wings shuddering violently, and then snapped. The plane spiraled down in pieces, swallowed by the clouds below. In 20 minutes, the sky was theirs. 30 Japanese planes down. One Hellcat lost. Back aboard Essex, as pilots climbed from their cockpits, deck crews cheered. The myth of Japanese invincibility had just been broken, and every man there knew it. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy ruled the air. The tide of war had turned, and it now rolled in steel and thunder. From the Philippines to the Marianas, the Grumman F6F Hellcat had become the dominant predator of the Pacific. Wherever the blue insignia of the U.S. Navy flew, the Hellcat followed, massive, relentless, and unforgiving. By June, the Japanese high command still clung to hope. They believed new tactics, more experienced pilots, and fresh aircraft could slow the American advance. But hope doesn't shoot bullets. And by the time the Battle of the Philippine Sea began, the Zero, once the most feared fighter in the world, was about to face extinction. June 19, 1944. The morning sky above the Philippine Sea pulsed with the sound of approaching engines. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft surged toward the U.S. carrier fleet. Over radio came the calm, clipped voice of the American Combat Air Patrol. "Many bogeys. Bearing 080. Angels 15. Let's get to work." What followed would be remembered forever as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Hundreds of Hellcats clawed into the sky, forming a defensive web miles wide. The Japanese attacked with everything they had left: bombers, fighters, kamikazes, but they were flying into the jaws of a machine that no longer fought on even terms. Hellcat gunners opened fire from miles away. .50 caliber tracers lit up the air like white-hot rain. Zeros tried to climb and roll, but the heavier, faster Hellcats could now outdive, outclimb, and outgun them. The sky became a storm of smoke trails and falling wreckage. A U.S. pilot radioed in disbelief. "This is like shooting turkeys on a fence." By sunset, over 300 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed. The Americans had lost fewer than 30. On the deck of the carrier Lexington, sailors lined the rails, watching the sun sink through the haze of burning fuel. The Pacific was theirs now, and the Hellcat, the slow, clumsy machine once mocked by Japan's finest, had just proven itself the undisputed king of the sky. When word reached the Japanese admirals in Tokyo, the silence was heavy. They knew what it meant. The balance of air power and the fate of the empire had been sealed. Tokyo, late 1944. The war room was dimly lit, thick with cigarette smoke and silence. Maps of the Pacific hung like open wounds across the walls, red pins spreading eastward, toward Japan itself. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa stood at the center, hands clasped behind his back, listening as reports came in. One after another, they told the same story: Zero squadrons wiped out, airfields destroyed, Pilots lost faster than they could be trained. The once mighty symbol of Japanese dominance, the Mitsubishi A6M0, had met its end not in one battle, but through 1,000 humiliations. Each sortie, each clash, each duel in the sky chipped away at its legend. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated Japan's best fighter. It had rewritten the rules of air combat. While Japanese engineers struggled to squeeze more performance from outdated engines, the Americans perfected the art of production. Grumman's factories on Long Island became a war machine in themselves, rolling out one Hellcat every hour. Over 12,000 were built before the war's end, each one a testament to industrial might and mechanical resilience. The statistics were staggering. In just 2 years of combat, F6F Hellcats scored over 5,000 aerial victories. The kill ratio, 19-1, was almost unthinkable. Every Japanese ace who took to the skies in 1944 faced the same outcome. Meet a Hellcat, and odds were, you wouldn't make it home. But the numbers tell only part of the story. What made the Hellcat truly legendary was its spirit, the way it transformed ordinary pilots into victors. It forgave mistakes. It took damage that would shred a lesser plane. Pilots who once feared the Zero now fought with confidence. They knew they could come home. Veteran aviators would later say, the Hellcat didn't just win the war. It gave us back the sky. By the final months of 1945, Japan's air arm was shattered. The empire had no wings left to fight with. When peace finally came, the Hellcat's shadow stretched across the Pacific, a symbol of the moment when fear turned into dominance. The war had begun with the scream of Zeros over Pearl Harbor. It ended with the steady, thunderous hum of Hellcats circling over Tokyo Bay.